Okay, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the next episode of the Speed Mooting podcast. My name is John Dove, and I am the founder of the National Speed Mooting Competition and the host of the podcast. Today, we have a very special guest. He is the author of Nothing Like the Truth. He was also a criminal barrister, former chairman of the Criminal Bar Association, and also a Crown Court judge. So welcome along, Nigel Lithman QC.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you, Nigel?
Great.
Great to have you on board. So you're going to be a very interesting guest. I've got a lot of questions to ask you, and I'm sure all of our listeners will be very interested to hear what you have to talk about. So we're going to start at the beginning, and it's going to be almost like a pupillage interview again for you. What was it that made you interested in the law? So why did you want to go down this career path?
Yeah, well, there were quite a lot of doctors in our family, and I couldn't stand the sight of blood. We also had a lot of lawyers, and we actually could have filled a court at any one time, in as much as we had a couple of barristers, a couple of solicitors. We had a shorthand writing in the days when things were taken down longhand or shorthand. And we had absolutely everything except for a defendant. Fortunately, one of our distant cousins came along and helped with that. And we had everybody that would fill a court. And I decided that the bar was a good place for me. I thought it would help me help others who can't defend themselves particularly. The rule of law and justice were very important to me. And so I just thought it was a very good gig if you want to help others. And actually, I've never met anybody that hasn't gone into criminal law for those very reasons.
Exactly. I would completely agree. I'm a criminal lawyer myself, and a lot of my reasons sort of cross over with yours, apart from I don't have any lawyers in the family, and I don't actually think there's any criminals in my family either. But for the most part, most of the other reasons are very similar to my own.
Somebody I remember once, back in the very, very dim, distant past, said that he regarded himself, I don't know if he was being glib, but he said he regarded a criminal lawyer as someone who stands between himself or another person and a police state. I mean, that is fairly exaggerated, I suppose, but maybe at its core, that's how he saw it, and maybe that's how it is.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to view it, actually. So as you say, at a pure base level, that might be quite true. Yeah. So from there, you went on, Nigel, and you qualified as a barrister. So tell me about your sort of early years at the bar. Had you only done exclusively crime, or did you have a little bit of a mix at the start?
No, let me go back just a step, if I may, before that, because I think some of your listeners may take solace and comfort from what I'm going to say. Because I was pretty useless at exams, and I combined it with being fairly lazy and messing around. And I also found them rather terrifying. And so I ended up, although I haven't been to a good school, I ended up at a technical college. And the reason I say that, and the fact that I got a third-class honours degree, is that although the qualifications I had probably wouldn't get you anywhere today at all, nevertheless, it is a badge of honor that you can say, despite those beginnings, I was able to become a silk and become a judge. And I'm not boasting in that sense. What I'm saying is that sometimes the profession that we go into suits us down to the ground. And we're late developers in the way that the exams and the studies haven't suited us. So I hope people take comfort from that where they need it.
Hopefully a lot of people do take comfort from that. I'm always seeing messages online about people saying that, they've had, difficult exams or difficult interviews, etc., and think that there's no end in sight. But it's a long road, and it's with this career, if you're determined to get there, you'll get there. It's just a case of persevering and putting the hard work in.
Well said, John, because I know that one of the things you wanted to ask me was, what do I think makes a good barrister? And as you say, almost as in everything else, tenacity, hard work, passion, and compassion. but also able to bring calm to a very turbulent and troubled situation. Those are real qualities for a barrister and a good barrister, and a lawyer, a good lawyer. Mm-hmm. Why did I choose crime? If you love the law and or money, don't do it. If you do love people and you do love justice, then do it. And I saw myself as a people person, and more I gravitated, although I went first of all to a common law set of chambers, I gravitated more and more to a criminal set of chambers, which is where I ended up. And I think it's, although there are a couple of things I did want to say actually. One was, if you can, the priority is to get somewhere to practice from. Don't worry if it's not the best set in the world. Just if you have somewhere to park your bottom, that is what you need as a lawyer. Most of us build our own practices. We succeed to the extent we're going to, off our own bat and off our own ability. And being in a Rolls-Royce set of chambers can't provide you something that you don't have anyway. So don't be too precious about the set of chambers that you choose. I actually went to, was at one of the best sets in the country. I actually didn't love it there. I loved my work and I loved my practice. Did I love being a member of 2 Bedford Row? Naughty thing to say, but not particularly. You know, no, that's. I love the bar. I love the job. I love my work. That's what counts, not where you're working from. So get yourself into somewhere if you're able to, and launch your career from that.
That's very good practical advice there. And at the end of the day, as a self-employed barrister, you are effectively a businessman from that point of view. So you need to be able to build those connections and build those contacts. And ultimately, you know, the more sort of proficient you become, the more skilled you become, I imagine it becomes easier to sort of attract the better work, regardless of where you are.
The more work and the more perspiration that you expend on your work, the luckier you get, is what I'm saying. The harder you work, the luckier you get.
Yeah.
And actually, and I would say that it is a virtue to do a broad range of things to start with before you narrow down the practice. I did general common law, I did family law, torts, contracts, etc. And then I went from there into crime, finding everything as I went fairly amusing and great experience. And equally, I spent a fair bit of time divided between defending and prosecuting. And at one stage, I was regarded, where I was doing a lot of work in Chelmsford, as a fairly successful defense advocate. And what the judge did, what the judge I was in front of him the whole time, was he called in the CPS and said, why don't you instruct him to prosecute? And in those days, the CPS guy said, well, actually, we tend to have horses for courses, and we don't mix and match. And the judge said, well, that's stupid. If you want to spike his guns and make him less effective, brief him to prosecute. And it works. And whenever you do anything, it equips you to do something else. So I even went to the company's court, didn't have a clue what I was doing. And just as I began, one of the judges in what would now be the admin court, I suppose, held up a bit of flimsy paper and said, can I ask which criminal advocate drafted this document? Because he could tell I didn't have a clue what I was doing. But next time I went back to the Crown Court, where I was in my comfort zone, I felt comfortable in my comfort zone.
Yeah, that's one of the nice things about crime. There's much more emphasis on oral advocacy rather than extensive written advocacy. I completely agree with what you've said there about how transferable the skills are from various areas. So I did personal injury for many years before I moved into crime. And I found that a lot of it was quite transferable anyway, because you're dealing with a lot of factual issues, which translates to crime, where obviously most of the cases deal with factual disputes. and you're dealing with people all the time as well. You've got an individual rather than a corporation as your client, etc. Can come from a broad cross section of society, so it could be absolutely anyone who is your client, and it works the same way in crime.
I did quite a lot of personal injury. I mean, if you call defending someone who chopped somebody's head off a personal injury case, I did cases that included that.
So we'll move on from there. And then you've sort of progressed through your career, and obviously you reached sort of the highest highs, let's say, in criminal law. Were there any particular highlights of your career?
Yeah, if I was thinking about this, the first thing is you can never tell what is going to stick in your mind. I mean, obviously the first case I ever did sticks in my mind for that reason. So I went along at 2 o'clock at Croydon to represent somebody who hadn't been seen in over 2 years, and the case was to be discontinued. And so I just went through the motions and called his name at 5 to 2 before going in and saying, he's not here. When of course you can guess what happened. He pops up, hello, I'm so-and-so. And I was then bounced into a 3-day trial. I don't want to pretend it's got a happy ending. I lost hands down, but so that did. Another case that sticks in my mind is 2 people in the magistrates' court who were charged with criminal damage on an ambulance. And they worked on an ambulance. And rather than go and answer a call, they cut the fan belt so they didn't have to respond to the emergency request. And I thought, what sort of people behave like this, you know? But I appeared ultimately in Silk in over 100 murders, and they were a diet of, excuse me, I got a frog in my throat, gruesome crime, which, as I've said, I mentioned severed heads, parents killing children. It's not always those cases that stick in your mind. I did the case that I found most interesting was a case involving a woman charged with murder of her son, where he was confined in 2 hospitals, one in Essex and one at Great Ormond Street. And during his period there, while they were trying to find out what was wrong with him, his mother was in daily attendance and was providing blood samples on his behalf, but she was literally doing it on his behalf because it was her blood that she was providing. And it turns out that she had Munchausen syndrome by proxy. And the chasing of the question as to how or whether the boy was actually ill and what happened factually in the case did turn it into a case that took 4 or 5 months at the Old Bailey. And it really was something very special. Once you do a case like the one I've just mentioned, then you want to go back and do a fraud, and then vice versa. You know, I've always been a bit contrary, I'm afraid. It's why everybody in my house either supports Tottenham or Arsenal, and I support Leyton Orient. You know, I mean, I've just got there's some in that respect, no disrespect to the mighty O's. But the last case that I did before I went on the bench, when I was just coming up to 65, was a fraud called the HBOS fraud. And that was really very complicated. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. We did it all on iPads. The juries had iPads. So that was presumably a thing to become more and more useful. It was in front of a judge who was a total pig when it came to his behavior towards counsel. And judge-itis is something that I refer to in the book, Nothing Like the Truth. And I hope that entertains everybody, but provides a good insight into work. But I also did health and safety, all sorts of regulatory cases, I represented a butcher in front of his licensing authority. I represented a university student in front of his board of examiners, having been alleged to have been cheating and the circumstances in which that happened. There's scope, isn't there, for all sorts of cases, for all sorts of lawyers to do. And if you're an advocate, then that's what you do. You can advocate a case, and probably better than most.
Absolutely. So coming back to what you mentioned there, so you said in your fraud trial, all of the jury members had iPads. Do you find that you needed to change your advocacy style to keep the jury engaged in a trial like that?
I think that there's an analysis of a case that you subject every case to. You have to work your way through it and to see what the triggers are that will actually assist. So, and often the things can be very basic. So in that particular case, the main players, those bankers, they were seen with, there's photographs of them in hot tubs in Malaga, generally misbehaving. And the thing that became obvious to start with was that the guy I was representing didn't buy into that at all. He had a wife at home, kids at home, and that's where he was going in his spare time. And he was the accountant. So you immediately recognize, one, if he has come in as rather than a corrupt banker, but as an honest accountant, if you can put up that mirage, that show of how he had spent his life, and then pull him away from what was going on in the seedier aspects, you're starting off in a good position. As for the use of technology, it's bound to become and must become, and I think it's really important that it does become more and more widespread in use in the law. And actually, moving on to a different topic, I think it's one of the ways through the backlog that has arisen, and how to deal with that is to deal with many more cases digitally.
Coming back to students then, so obviously you've given some general advice about chambers. Do you have any other sort of tips or pearls of wisdom for students that are trying to not just go to the criminal bar, but go to the bar generally?
Yeah. Never miss an opportunity to take an opportunity. I still get, and I'm sure I will, but I better repeat that I'm retired substantially. I get in a lot of requests for marshalling work experience and so on and so forth. And of course, it's really important that both lawyers and judges provide those opportunities. I think the next thing is to find your strength, work out where your strengths lie. And so although we've spoken about advocacy for so far as the bar is concerned, in my day, there was a much greater divide between criminal advocates, criminal barristers, and criminal solicitors. But I found that a first-class criminal solicitor was worth his or her weight in gold. And I could name you a half a dozen of what I would regard as top criminal solicitors, in the same way I could do so of top criminal barristers. So I think it's quite important that they work out for themselves what way they want to go down the line. The other thing is of course it's tough. It's probably tougher now to get a place in the law than it's ever been. But don't for one moment think that back in 1976, and I repeat, it's 1976, not 1876, when I actually began, it was also said, you're not going to get a place in chambers, you're not going to get a pupillage, you're not going to get a tenancy, you're going to starve. Well, if anybody's actually got a visual rather than just an audio, they'll see that I haven't starved. And you don't enter a job to fail. But what is terrible, of course, is where people are not getting enough money to do what they love to do. And that is one of the bigger aspects that there is. So don't be put off. Don't let anybody tell you that you cannot make it work. Not everybody succeeds, and some people it won't work. But you will be surprised for how many people it does work.
Excellent, great advice there. And just lastly, on sort of pointers, talking about advocacy generally, any sort of do's and don'ts for successful advocacy?
Yeah, don't forget. Be polite. Don't think that you're in some sort of bowling alley. It's a court of law, and however casual, and I hope I am casual and informed, it doesn't mean that you can take the mick out of the proceedings. So when you begin any submission, you always say, may it please the court, may it please your honour. And this isn't regarded as something out of date. This is regarded as something that is a respect and recognition of the court rather than of the judge himself. So I'm even old-fashioned enough to say that I prefer it that the court is open, as it's called, by the usher. Hear ye, draw near and give your attendance. And I remember some usher saying to me, do you like the court open? And I just said, well, if we're going to start the day, I guess we've got to, haven't we? So I think you better have.
So coming back to your career then, Nigel. So obviously at the criminal bar, you've done pretty much everything that you could. You've made it all the way to Silk, as you say, taken part in over 100 murders as Silk. And you then, probably at the peak of your career, became the chairman of the CBA, the Criminal Bar Association. So do you want to tell us how that came about?
Well, interesting you should say at the peak of my career. It wasn't at the peak of my career, but it became the peak of my career. It was something I absolutely loved doing. I was approached by somebody who said it would be a good idea if you put your name forward, and I did, and was elected in. And at the time I became chairman. Like today, the criminal bar and criminal lawyers were just ready for a fight. You know, as Popeye the Sailor Man used to say, I've had all I can stand and I can't stand no more. And they were absolutely at the edge of despair. And so that's why I was happy to take the job, and then to go on consolidating the steps that we needed to take. But we had an action that was simple to take, and that is that the Chris Grayling was saying he was going to cut the legal aid bill by a further £220 million. We said that's wholly unacceptable. I came up with the phrase, not a penny more, meaning if you cut it 1 penny more, we will strike. And strike meant a combination of actually not going into court and also not doing the work of others, no returns. And that we assume would say that we will bring the system to a halt. So I promised him that's what we would do. And what you have to do is just make sure that there's no give and take about this. I mean, that is what I will do if he threatens to further reduce the budget. And that's what we did. And after about 2 days in total of not going into court and also implementing the policy of not doing each other's returns, he settled and said, when I say settled, he said, right, I will not cut the legal aid bill. And you can imagine, I thought I was hearing things, because strikers don't defeat governments, but that's what we were able to do. And I had an enormous. I produced the Monday Message, the blog, the weekly blog, which took sort of most of the weekend and worked. It's a 2-year process, vice chair and then chair. And so I worked every day for 2 years, and it was the most rewarding and gratifying part of my whole career.
I can imagine. And it must have been difficult, particularly alongside your practice at the same time.
Yeah. But well, I mean, they're different things, but provided if you've worked a reputation which shows that you're not, and that's where it all links in together, I think, that you're not a fly by night, that you're not a dodgy geezer, but you can be relied upon. Those that would tell Grayling about my reputation would tell him that. The other thing, of course, as is the modern byword, is transparency is so important. Sure that all of the important judges, namely the Lord Chief Justice, the recorder, the head judge at the Old Bailey, and one or two others knew exactly what we were doing just before we were doing it. And most of them would say either, well, we applaud what you're doing, or we won't interrupt what you're doing. But they couldn't say, well, actually, there was no way they would get together with the bureaucrats to actually say we shouldn't do what we were doing. So it was a great fight, and it's interesting to see how it's fed in with what's going on now. And of course, sandwiched in between was my short trip to the bench, where I spent 4 years.
Yeah, we'll move on to this next. So what brought about the decision to move to the bench?
Well, I've just finishing a case in Manchester. I had done the fraud I mentioned to you, and I just thought, I'm coming up to 65, and most people retire, and I was in a position that I could retire. But equally, I just thought, I've seen so many judges doing things in a way that I couldn't say anything other than I thoroughly disapprove of it, that I would go onto the bench and try and be a good judge, a nice person, kind, smiley, human, etc. And I think that's what I was.
That was going to be my next question. Do you think you achieved that?
I really do. When we were talking about what makes a good barrister and what makes a good judge, it's the same thing. You are dealing with what is the worst storm in the people's lives that they've had to encounter, whether that be the defendant or the victim or witnesses or whatever. This may be just another case to you, but this is the most important thing in their lives, and it does really affect them and can affect them desperately. And so what I think is a great quality is if you can bring calm to those situations. And you must do that with politeness, but kindness, just kindness. It doesn't mean I'm afraid, just introducing calm and politeness to a defendant does not mean to say you're not going to send him to prison for a long time. And he knows that. But what you have to try and deal with is his terror that's going on through his head at that time. Often, or usually perhaps, they can deal with the prison. They can deal with a bitter bird. What they can't deal with is the fear that they're going through of that situation. Hopefully, the solicitors, the barristers, whoever it may be, they are actually calming people down. And that's what a judge can do as well.
Exactly, yeah. Very, very sensible. Now, you've mentioned difficult judges. At your time in practice, did you ever find any difficult opponents? You tend to find most people in practice are quite friendly and quite easy to get on with, but occasionally you do find the odd sort of sharp practitioner.
There's been a couple of series on Netflix I've seen recently, and I can't remember the name of it, unfortunately. But there is one where you see two opposing Counsel at the Old Bailey, and you just see how friendly they are to each other. And I think that's one thing that people won't necessarily recognize is something that goes on more completely. And a lot of my best friends, you know, the old saying, a lot of my best friends were lawyers. But they are difficult things, and they don't always run along together. And how you react may have to differ in situation by situation. So one of my close friends, who remains a good friend, he was able, in a case in which we co-defended, to give no warning by the way he cross-examined, that he wasn't only saying that his client was uninvolved, but he was saying that my client was responsible for the offence. Now, he didn't have to run his case like that. He could have said, his client's not involved. Who was involved? He doesn't know. And he didn't really show the extent of the cutthroat, as you know it's called, between two defendants when they are hurling bricks at each other. He didn't indicate that there was any sort of cutthroat all the way through the case until he stood up and addressed the jury. Now, he knows that I have no, because of the order of defendants, he knows that I had no comeback from it. And so it was that his client was acquitted and mine was convicted. And I went to the Court of Appeal, but of course, as they often do, the Court of Appeal just said, well, tough luck. These things happen. You know, and I was saying, well, no, they're not supposed to happen. And if he knew that's what he was saying, even at that stage, then the judge should have allowed a retrial of my client, which is what I asked for. But the judge said no, and the Court of Appeal said no. And my client went to prison. But when I now sit opposite, although I tease him about what he did, it goes a lot further than the teasing, and he knows that. And he is a very, very able lawyer, very able lawyer. And he was able to see the consequences of what he was doing. And even if he'd have said nothing other than to pull me to one side and say, this is what's coming, that is what I would expect him to do, because we do expect fair and decent behavior. So it makes me sound sore about that sort of thing. But I would say that in terms of difficult opponents, there are those that have attached to them a label that says sharp practitioner, count your fingers when you've shaken my hand. You know, and you know who they are. But funnily enough, it's this other person that's left, because I know what those others are like. But and you've got to watch out the whole time. But it's interesting because often it's a bit like you tend in life not to like people. This is my experience. I tend not to like people that don't like me. And I'm because it's a lot easier when it coincides like that. And also, I'm quite often compared with Marmite. I'm not sure how many hate and how many love. I hope the preponderance is on the latter. But you've got to have your wits about you if you can, and that's where an opponent can get you into trouble.
Absolutely. I think that's where your experience comes into play, isn't it? The more experience you become, the better able you are to deal with these situations. Okay, so we're coming up towards the end now. So we mentioned at the beginning that you've recently written a book, Nothing Like the Truth. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your book and maybe why people should read the book? I should say before you go on to talk about it, I have read the book and I would highly recommend it to anybody.
So there's the book, Nothing Like the Truth. Strange enough, somebody who gave a very big thumbs up to it, is the well-known author, The Secret Barrister. And they referred to it as a book that they couldn't put down. It's a coincidence. They told me at the time that they were doing the review that they've got a book coming out, which is now out, called Nothing But the Truth. So this is nothing like the truth. And the reason it's called Nothing Like the Truth is it's the distortion of the court oath, which is to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. And we, the judges, know that what we're going to hear, as often as not, is nothing like the truth. Because if it wasn't for liars, there wouldn't be trials. And usually in court, somebody, and sometimes everybody, is telling lies. So it sort of heralded the preconception that you should deal with, which is that I'm afraid that whereas everybody should be innocent until proven guilty, it doesn't always work like that. And you have to deal with a prejudice that there is at the outset of a case in the minds of a judge. Can people get a fair trial? Absolutely. They get it courtesy of the jury. And like most advocates, I'm a staunch believer in the jury. But I laughed every day of my career. And I said the day I stopped laughing is the day I would retire. But when I was stopping laughing as a barrister, I thought, I know, I'll go onto the bench. And you can still laugh from there. So I continue to laugh, and I hope the humor and the fun is seen throughout. But it does give a lot of good advice, and it is a good analysis of the problems of the criminal justice system. And a lot of aspiring barristers and aspiring lawyers generally have come, I'm very glad to say, and given me invitations to attend their universities and colleges because they have thoroughly enjoyed the book. Available on Amazon now. And if you can't buy one copy, buy two.
Great plug there. No, I completely echo what you say. It was a fantastic read. And I think whether you're in criminal law or not, or have an aspiration to go into criminal law, I'd say it's a great read for anyone. If you've got any interest in the law, certainly have a read of the book.
A little plug for criminal justice as well, because I suspect you'll agree with me. I know you've had a fabulous and varied career as well. But when you go to a dinner party, if such a thing exists anymore, I've got to be in bed by 9, so I don't go out to dinner parties. But if you go out to a dinner party, if you're there with a commercial lawyer or a civil practitioner, and you're there as a criminal lawyer, everybody will want to hear your stories. And they're going to say, can you tell us about landlord and tenant?
Yeah, it doesn't happen at all. Funny you should mention that. My girlfriend actually deals with the Landlord and Tenant Act. She's a commercial solicitor. So if we go anywhere, I tend to be the one that gets asked for the stories. I'm sure she won't mind me saying that on the podcast.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that takes us through the legal sides. That was the boring part. We'll jump onto a little bit of a quick fire at the end, just to let the listeners get to know Nigel Lithman QC a little bit more. Now, first one, this is a debate I had with somebody recently, and you're a judge, so I'd like your judgment on this. Crisps on a sandwich, yes or no?
Crisps are a sandwich, or yeah.
No. So let's say you've got a cheese sandwich, put some crisps on, crush it down, yay or nay?
Oh, yeah. And hopefully some brown sauce as well.
Oh, I didn't think of that actually.
Yeah, basics, best sandwich. In the old days, corned beef, coleslaw, cheese and pickle, but cheese and pickle with crisps, ideal. Yeah.
Brilliant. Excellent. Okay, on that topic, what is your favorite food?
Oh, God. My favorite food is roast duck. So whether it's Chinese, deep roast duck, Peking duck, or just duck I might make at home, that is great. But the trouble is, John, everything I happen to be eating, it's not what is my favorite food. The real question is, why do I have to eat so much of it? So much time, eat it. And you know that we're hurrying this podcast a bit, not too much, I hope, because I'm going out. Well, I'm supposed to be in bed by 9 o'clock. I'm going out tonight yet again to eat to a fish restaurant where I will have what I hope is one of my favorite foods, which is fish pie.
Ooh.
And the questions: is it fish pie with potato? Is it fish pie with cheese? Is it just? I think it should be just mackerel, cod, and plaice. I don't like shellfish in it, and I do like potato, and it must be crispy. On food, and it's much more interesting than law, everything must be crispy, everything must be hot.
I think we might be at the start of a new series here. We can do a sort of culinary podcast as well while we're at it. So you mentioned in your book, you mentioned the Gypsy King a few times. Did you watch him in action over the weekend?
Yes, I did. Of course. Should we talk about him for a moment?
Let's talk about him for a moment.
I boxed as a child, and I followed boxing. And when I was 13, I had the chance to go and see Muhammad Ali, and I had a ticket, but I didn't have anyone to go with. And when my mum heard the ticketing agency come through with a ticket, she thought, he's not going to Wembley at the age of 13 to watch Henry Cooper fight Cassius Clay as was. So she didn't even tell me that I'd got a ticket. Anyway, the Gypsy King. He's a great fighter. I like the fact that he's built like a fighter. So he's not gonna. We've got this in common. Neither of us have sculpted bodies. He's about 3 foot taller than I am, but he is a great fighter, and I think somebody was putting it right when they said he's probably in the top 10, but he's not of all time, but maybe not the top 5.
Oh, right. Okay. That's interesting. I'm probably not as big a boxing fan as yourself, but yeah, I'd certainly put him up there at the top. Do you think we'll ever see the title unification fight?
Yeah, I do. I think he will irresistibly want to fight Anthony Joshua. And you know, if let me just go back to the law. Go into crime to earn money or a lot of money, but because you're paid in arrears for what you do, when finally you get a check through, it's rather nice. I'd be lying to say it's rather nice. Now he will earn 5 or 6 million in his own hand for fighting Joshua, maybe more, maybe 10 or 15, and I'm not sure he'll be able to say no to that. So I think we will see unification, and I think he'll win it.
I would agree. I think he will as well. And I've got a feeling he wants the Francis Ngannou fight as well. And I've got a feeling he's crazy enough to do it in a cage. He'll go on and try and win the UFC title as well. Why not? Right. Well, I think that brings us towards the end anyway. Thank you very much for appearing on the podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you on. That was Nigel Lithman QC, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much to everybody. I love appearing on these sort of things. And I hope you buy the book. But even if you don't, I hope you say that you'll buy the book. I mean, so many people these days say they'll buy a book and they don't. And even if they buy it, they don't read it. That's fine. In fact, it'll make you laugh. I mean, the person I meet tonight said that they were guffawing on the train. So